So it's important for me to see my colleagues as humans. I want to know what they value. I want to know about their kids. I want to know how I can assist them in their life, their personal life. Are they going through a struggle, a tragedy? Do we have some shared connection? And once I can find that commonality, it humanizes the whole situation. And I think people are desperate for politics to be human again. And so then we can actually work on the thing that impacts everyday lives. And so when I came into the State House as the wife of a police officer, I was able to have that commonality with former law enforcement officers, people that have been longstanding supporters of law enforcement agencies, and have that and really command that respect.
Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast focused on incredibly talented people who've dedicated themselves to public service when their country and communities needed it the most. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bolton of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. Check out newdealleaders.org to find out more. What does it take for a Latina Democrat to win and govern in a predominantly white suburban swing district in Indiana? Victoria Garcia Wilburn won her first race by just 232 votes by showing that the issues that matter the most are not partisan. She passed legislation supporting the mental health of first responders, a bill to let kids be kids in the real world, and another bill to protect them online. A healthcare professional, a professor, a legislator, listen to how she has successfully turned deeply personal issues into laws that make a difference. Enjoy. Indiana Representative Victoria Wilburn, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thanks for having me.
You, a tenured associate professor, esteemed in your field, and then you decided to run for a swing district in a red, maybe hopefully someday purplish state. Can you talk about what made you decide to run and get engaged in the political process?
A wild thought, right? I mean, academia, at that time was pretty stable. I would say well-funded regarding research work. And you're right, I was just kind of climbing up that academic ladder, knee-deep in publications and student mentorship. But all the while, the city in which my university is situated in was experiencing one of the largest opioid overdose epidemics in the country. So Indianapolis was a hot spot for overdose. And a lot of my community engaged research centered around adolescence and recovery. Our addiction numbers and substance use disorder numbers were so egregious that we actually have a high school dedicated to teenagers in recovery.
Wow.
And then that was my main community research partner. And a lot of my qualitative and mixed methods research, the resulting, future implications section was always policy changes. So at the time around 2021, 2022, substance use disorder really still had a large stigma associated with it and was seen as a moral failure. And the public health infrastructure and behavioral health access in Indiana was at the bottom of the barrel. And so I found myself in this new open district after the redrawing of maps, and somebody approached me and said, I had this wild idea that you should run, and I took them up on their offer.
And you are running from a background of academia. You're running as a Latina. Your district is suburban, majority white. Can you talk about how you launched that campaign, how you engaged, and then how you thought about it for yourself as somebody who would have to navigate all these complicated waters we find ourselves in?
Goodness, I mean, that's such a great question. So it was really intentional for me to use my maiden name along this campaign trail. So, I'm known publicly as Representative Garcia Wilburn. And in fact, around campus, I'm Dr. Wilburn. And so we decided to just run as our authentic selves. And so I'm married to a Black man. At the time, he was a police officer, a sergeant with the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. And our three beautiful biracial children. So a school-age mom, which I think a lot of people in our district resonate with. the district is very suburban family, right, oriented. And so I just wanted to kind of disrupt the norms of what a Democrat looks like in Indiana. So we are very much pro-police. We are very much, family values, and that means family values. We take care of our neighbors. We lend a meal when somebody needs it. We participate in the clothes drives and all those things, and sharing sports equipment. Making sure that everybody has a seat at the table. A Democrat also cares about small government, because the most proximal government is the government that's most felt. And so I wanted to run on really just who we were and how we defined our political affiliation. And so I think that resonated at the doors. And I think when I would describe to people who I was and what I stood for, it got them thinking.
And I want to hear more about what it was like at the door. But first, just to help our listeners understand, can you describe the politics of Indiana? It wasn't always red. In my lifetime, I remember there were senators and governors who were Democrats. Talk about a little bit about what are the political what's the political environment of Indiana, and how did it get there?
Yeah, so I actually had to learn a lot of this. I'm a Hoosier by choice. So we are transplant by way of Boston and originally from Chicago. And so I had only lived in these big Democratic cities. And so first moved to Indiana 22 years ago, and that was when things were starting to shift. And so I've lived the majority time under one party control, both the governor, House and Senate. But so learning the history, and in fact, one of my colleagues is the daughter of longtime House Speaker Pat Bauer. And so learning the history of the Democratic Party and how it ebbed and flowed a lot, how it was, these simple majority rules. And there was a lot of years where there was 50-50 splits right down the middle. And I think that, during those times, things were kind of kosher, if you will. I think people felt heard. There was a lot of collaboration and consensus. But I think so many states like Indiana saw huge swings, and particularly when workers' rights were infringed upon. I think Democrats used a strategy that now I think maybe is in question. This made national headlines. Indiana Democrats left the state in an attempt to try to protect the unionization of workers, and that kind of backfired. And so we saw a lot of those Democratic seats turn red. And then, of course, when you have majority party, you're in control of the maps, which is why I'm such an advocate for nonpartisan map drawing. But here we are. So a lot of these districts have overcompensated rural areas and red areas to their favor. And so gerrymandering is a real tactic that's used in real time. We know it, made headlines, obviously, this year when President Trump called for the redrawing of maps. But it's something that happens, here every 10 years. And so we are seeking balance. I think the communities are seeking balance, and Indiana's overdue to be purple again.
And give us a sense of where the Democrats stand right now in terms of the numbers in the legislature, the overall registration of the state, because gerrymandering does distort the political realities of folks on the ground.
Absolutely. Yes. And so we are 70-30, so 70 Republicans and 30 Democrats in the House. And we are 40-10 in the Senate. So 40 Republicans and 10 Democrats in the Senate. So it's, I think there's this misnomer that you're like a registered party. We don't have that in Indiana. It is an open primary system. And so there's a lot of conflation because Republicans almost always have a pretty robust primary, and Democrats hardly ever have a competitive primary. And that is not to Democrats' advantage. But this year is different. I will say that this year feels different. The ballot boxes have shown it's different. We have more Democrats running for Indiana House than ever before. And we're excited about the energy that brings. And to some degree, I'm not taking credit for it, but I think it's okay for Democrats to run as a reflection of the community they represent. And that can mean a lot of different things depending on different areas in the state. And so I am a reflection of what my community values, which may differ from federal national headlines.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about that campaign, and you have this passion for your district. You look different than your district, but you share many of those values. And in a world where, everybody from the algorithms to the president is trying to divide us,
right,
simplify things, how did you break through to be able to tell your story?
Yeah, I think, we really felt the movement of Christian nationalism here in our state pretty deeply. And I think that there's, again, this confusion that only one party can be a faithful party or faithful to something. And that was something that I also leaned into at the doors. And so I am Mexican American. I'm fourth generation American. My father tells the story that his father and my grandfather's father told him that we didn't cross the border crossed us. So I like to give a little history lesson when we bring up immigration at the State House. I mean, who knew that state representatives would be speaking about a federal issue, but that time is here. And so just reminding people that so much of this country started off in a shared way with Mexico, and that we've seen these tactics throughout history. So in the 1930s, the Mexican Repatriation Act sent so many American citizens back to a country that they never knew. And so in that time, my father's side grew up very impoverished, picking cotton in Texas. And my mother came to Indiana by way of migrant work, picking tomatoes in the tomato fields. And so when I get to tell that story about why rural Indiana matters to me, it's a disruptor. I think people pause and think about that, like, wow, there are other roots here in Indiana besides than what we visibly see. And so the Latino community is a huge contributor economically, agriculturally. They are the largest sector of small business owners. And so to see these recent attacks on people that look like me feels very critical. And so however I can use my voice and incorporate a position of faith that, like, we can have law and order, but we can pursue that law and order with care and concern. That's what I want people to know and hear. And that has been very well mutually felt at the doors.
Yeah. Talk about this experience of obviously being in the political minority, but then also in a racial minority, gender minority. How do you maneuver in the Capitol such that you can drive legislation when there may be, you're at in the minority in so many different ways?
So I'll ask you a question. Do you know what an occupational therapist is?
I do, yes.
Okay. So an occupational therapist is like skilled at listening. So when I train my students, I train them to be like, there's whole theories around intentional listening and therapeutic rapport and intentional relationships. And so occupational therapists have to find commonalities with their patients very quickly because we ask them to do very vulnerable things. And we meet people at some of the most desperate times in their life. So I will see someone back when I used to practice clinically, one day post-stroke, and they're hemiplegic, right? They're paralyzed on one side. And I have to assess how they dress themselves. And so the first thing I do is I go into that room, and I'm a student of theirs. I want to learn all about them. What's your life like? What's your support system? What are your favorite activities? What do you want to get back to doing? What's your employment? All of these things that make up that person. And then I can develop a connection so that I can say, and now I need to see you dress and undress yourself in order to make sure it's safe for you to go home. Honestly, legislating is pretty similar. People just want to be heard. And the other side of the aisle just wants to be heard and respected, just like we want to be heard and respected. So it's important for me to see my colleagues as humans. I want to know what they value. I want to know about their kids. I want to know how I can assist them in their life, their personal life. Are they going through a struggle, a tragedy? Do we have some shared connection? And once I can find that commonality, like it humanizes the whole situation. And I think people are desperate for politics to be human again. And so then we can actually work on the thing that impacts everyday lives. And so when I came into the State House as the wife of a police officer, I was able to have that commonality with former law enforcement officers, people that have been longstanding supporters of law enforcement agencies, and have that and really command that respect because I walked that blue line alongside my husband. I know what it is to be fearful that he may not return home one night. I know what it is to sacrifice. And so if we can keep those things in common and not focus on the maybe 10,000 things that we don't agree on, we can actually create good pieces of legislation and listen to each other and be heard.
That's amazing. My mom had a stroke. She had an occupational therapist, and she was not an easy patient. And so I had never thought about it from the occupational therapist side, but it does seem like a skill set that is underutilized or much needed in our politics today. When you got there, you began to build bridges. You've been able to move pieces, even though you are in the minority, you've been able to move pieces of legislation. Can you talk about some of the efforts you made and why you focused in those areas?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll start with public safety, right? Really shortly thereafter, my husband actually pursued a psychological retirement from the police department because he had chronic and persistent PTSD. And a lot of the reason that I ran was because we had so many barriers to receiving that treatment. And really, again, felt this like huge burden of stigma that like, you know, you're a police officer, you're in this uniform, you're the person running towards danger, but you also have these very intimate and deep stressors in your life that you can't manage anymore. And so to bring awareness about public safety and their journey in mental health access and recovery was huge for me. I said that if I could do this, I mean, everything else would be sprinkles on the cake because this was the cherry on top. And so this piece of legislation has become a model piece of legislation for all 50 states. It was featured in Police One, which is law enforcement's biggest magazine. And we brought along fire and EMS, and you would just hear these stories, gut-wrenching stories from current chiefs of fire and current chiefs of police about how they have just pushed down and suffered with their mental health issues. And my take on that is like, certainly I don't want you to suffer personally, but also when you bring that level of mental load into the community feels that mental load too. And so we can only be as well as the people providing wellness services to us. And so my law actually provides mental health and resiliency training to all Indiana law enforcement recruits in police and fire and EMS. And they receive confidential mental health resources and supports throughout their first year. And then we educate the chiefs of police and fire and allow them to understand how to identify somebody with mental health struggles and how to give them resources and where those resources and supports are. And it's been this really beautiful collaboration. And it was a bill that passed unanimously throughout its course in my first year. So I think I maybe had a like, oh, legislating is easy moment because I got this thing done and not recognizing actually what a huge deal that was. But again, when you bring a level of vulnerability, when you find a coalition to build around with your cause, and when you are relentless in representing people who don't feel heard, I think good things can happen.
No, that is such an incredible story and amazing in your first year to be able to carry a piece of legislation that it can be so influential and impactful, not only in your state, but now as a model across the country. You've also done a lot of work around kids and kid safety. Can you talk about some of those efforts and where you think your state could be a model for other states in that area as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I think a lot of these things are born out of personal intersections and then recognizing that other people are having the same barriers. We moved into this really great established suburban community, and we were the youngest family on the block. And I had three, children at the time. I think their ages were like 7, 5, and 3. And they hopped on their bikes as they did in their old neighborhood. But their old neighborhood was full of kids. And so, of course, I'm like, put your helmets on and watch your little brother. And like, we live right near a court. And so the kids were out there and they, nobody was on the court. It's obviously a dead end area. And so they're out, doing circles around, and a neighbor comes out and is just mortified at what she's seeing. She's seeing these 3 children ride their bikes and I'm nowhere in sight. And so she follows them home, and, I had no sooner than taken the sold sign out of our yard. And she's like, you better do a good job watching your kids. I'm going to call DCS on you. This is not how, and just like this very reactive response. And that really stuck with me. I'm like, my kids are just riding their bikes. I mean, I have all these great memories from my own childhood where I was, out all day on a bike and, playing pickup baseball with the guys in my neighborhood, and, such a tomboy doing all these really cool things. And my parents were like checking at dinner time, and that was the rule. And we have become so fearful, actually at a time when our country is like the safest it's ever been. And somehow we have lessened our concern on like devices and being online. Like somehow that feels safer than letting our children touch grass. And so myself and another colleague came together and we proposed like the childhood independence bill, where, it shouldn't be a concern of DCS, or parents shouldn't be threatened by a calling of DCS just because they're doing things that are age appropriate, where they are developing independence and are not attended by an adult. And so it was, again, another piece of legislation that grew a lot of support, and that actually was very nostalgic. And lawmakers were coming up to the mic telling stories of their free range childhoods and how well they turned out. And so I think we're just craving a bit of that nostalgia where the world isn't so scary, and we're knocking on neighbors' doors without being fearful. And our kids are, making the right decisions that allow them to become really healthy adults. And so I think that DCS, using that as a threat is wrong, and it clogs up resources in instances where DCS really is needed.
I love that. And especially as somebody who just sent his 10-year-old out to walk the dog, both to get him out of a little free range and also so that neither one would make noise during this podcast. I'm super, super grateful that, yes, we've decided to overregulate in the real world and underregulate online. And it's crazy. Can you talk a little bit about, and you've also gone the other way of trying to put more protections around social media and youth access. Can you talk about some of those efforts and maybe some of the forces you've had to come up against?
Yeah. Again, this piece of legislation was birthed out of the headlines of our community. It was really devastating. We had a young girl, unfortunately, lose her life because of an interaction that went really, really wrong online. And her name is Haley Busby. I do want to say her name because there's a coalition of supporters and Army that are continuing to push forward with internet safety laws. And we were just able to do, expand something that is going to take a lot of time and is going to take a lot of thought. And so we needed to get to a place where we can at least do something. Because unfortunately, Haley lost her life, again, just being a kid, right? Making a risky decision maybe as a teenager, which we all have done. We have all made risky decisions in our teenage years, and it shouldn't cost us our life. But these predators are online waiting for vulnerability and waiting to take advantage of our young adults and teenagers. And it's awful. And there's no accountability from the large social media companies. And there's little oversight in that area. I know that in my community of fishers, law enforcement, I just met with the chief a few weeks ago. They are up to their eyeballs in trying to monitor all this online activity because of, grooming and just engaging children in inappropriate ways and sextortion and all of this. And so what we did was we expanded the silver alert system, which I'm sure you're familiar with, with somebody that is an older adult, maybe mentally incapacitated because of dementia or Alzheimer's. We issue silver alerts to help find them. Our children now can be in an alert system at a much greater pace. There doesn't have to be runaway laws that are getting in the way of that. If a child is missing, we can act much faster. So again, supporting law enforcement with another tool. But there's more to come there, and it's going to be a bipartisan effort. We're really thinking about building an omnibus child internet safety bill for this legislative session because, we just hit the tip of the iceberg with that.
And what has been the response of parents in your district, of kids, and of social media companies that may be trying to push back?
Yeah, I think, again, these issues aren't partisan issues. Like, we want to keep our community safe, and this is just another extension of safety. And I think there's this desire for the community to work together with anybody who cares. And that goes on the D side and the R side. And so the response has been overwhelmingly supportive. Again, it feels like we haven't done enough, and so we need to bring more back. But I was kind of instrumental in pushing back even on an exemption for TikTok this legislative session. And so, had a conference committee, and there was going to be, again, some exception to a bill. And, I just said, hold on, I think if we're doing this, I don't think anybody needs to be accepted. I think have an exemption. I think we need to make sure that the playing field is even so that we can make a proper assessment of what we're dealing with. And if we exempt somebody, then we don't understand what their landmines are. And so I just want to look at things equitably. I want to know what the lay of the land is. Obviously, social media can be a great tool for communication. It can be a great tool for entertainment. But I think that we are in uncharted territories. And the American Academy of Pediatrics will agree that screen time for children in excessive amounts is harmful to brain development. That is the science of it. And so we have to really think about pursuing safeguards and guardrails, maybe for parents that aren't aware and aren't doing that themselves. And so I'd like to keep all children safe for as long as possible.
It's so important. And yeah, as a father, please do. And then please, let's create some model legislation for all the states. Yeah. I want to ask, if the Democratic Party is going to reestablish itself in your state and then in the country, we need to win in places like Fishers, Indiana. And we need to have candidates like you out there connecting and with the people on their issues. What are you seeing in terms of how your community thinks the country is going right now? And then also, how does your community see the Democratic Party as an alternative? And what do we need to know as a country about what's going on in your community?
I think a lot of people are waking up to the idea that identity politics is dangerous. Being a Democrat is just like one sliver of who I am. I'm a lot of other things. I'm a baseball mom. I'm a sorority mom. I'm the wife of a retired police officer, a tenured professor, like all these other things that make up me, right? And I think that people have gotten so far into identity politics that it clouds the realm of possibility. And so I think it's important for Democrats to be visible in spaces where the community is. And that was the strategy that we had in 22 that has been tried and true to today. And it's actually, again, kind of brought from my academic world of community engaged research, believing that there's no power dynamics and allowing academic collaborations to exist naturally with community partners is the same way. Like, we aren't just attending Democratic meetings, and we're not just attending where we think Democrats are going to be, or that's not where we show up. We show up everywhere. So we're at the farmers markets, we're at the back to school nights, we're at the community concerts, and we're not necessarily campaigning, but we're just visible and approachable. So many people will see me just out, at these events, and they'll come and they'll thank me. And they'll say, I've watched your pragmatic approach to legislating, and it's so refreshing. Or I was a long time, one party voter, but you convinced me otherwise. And there's been this return on investment. So in 24, where we had real, like maybe quiet Republican supporters, we had enough supporters that were willing to put Republicans for Victoria Garcia Wilburn signs in their yards. And now we have people that were, once tried and true one party straight ticket voters come out and like be public about their support for me. And I think there's just a demand for that type of legislator or politician. And I hate calling myself that because I'm still so rooted in the community. But I think that we have to wake up that like, we don't win points for being a part of a certain team. We actually win votes by understanding our community.
I think it's absolutely true. And just being present and then working on solutions that impact people's lives, so important. You mentioned all the roles that you play, and I think some listeners are going to be like, that sounds exhausting.
It
is. And maybe they have an interest in public service, but maybe they're like, I cannot even fathom how you do this. How do you manage your time and the competing demands on it? And what advice do you have for people who are maybe thinking about running from, I don't think there's a big pipeline of occupational therapists into politics right now. And so what advice do you have for those who maybe never thought of themselves as running for office, but who maybe after hearing you think maybe they should?
Yeah, I mean, I think the secret sauce is just being yourself, and I can't do it all. And I don't do it all. There we go. I don't do it all. And so I think, just being vulnerable with that too, like I'm still the mom who desires to be in the stands at the games, and I'm still showing up at parent teacher night and all of the things. And it just requires an extreme amount of discipline during the day. Obviously, a lot of decisions get made even after hours, but that means I just have to work extra hard during session and during the daytime so that I'm not missing those opportunities. I'm just creating different ones. And so, yes, we've got a very large, robust family calendar. We're a family of 5. And I have a great partner. My husband and I have been married for 22 years, and he's, such a great supporter. And so I would say, you used to hear some things like, if you're going to be in politics, you've got to sacrifice. And that never sat well with me. I think it should be done collectively. Like, it's not that I'm taking away from my family time or taking away from my responsibilities. I'm just kind of integrating all of that in. And so it's not like work-life balance, it's work-life integration. And then of course I've learned too that just protecting some of the times that I'm off is so important. And I think that's important too, just for our mental health, where we're turning all the screens off, we're putting away the mail message and putting our voicemails on and calling it a day sometimes, because even though this role is a 24/7, 365, it's important for me to fill up my cup too. And I have an office that supports that.
All good advice. And not that it makes it easier, but it makes it, it does allow you to fill that cup up and do all the many things that you've done. That's why we love having you in the New Deal, and we loved having you on the podcast today. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing all this model legislation that you're going to be putting forward for the rest of us to bring to our states.
All right, wish me luck.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars were used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.